Psychological thrillers have been leaving people scratching their heads, second-guessing themselves, and checking in their wardrobes for life's true evils for years. And that's the beauty of a psychological thriller. The clue really is in the name. A psychological thriller is written, shot, and edited to emulate real-life events in many ways. Psychological thrillers were derived from one of the most widely popular film genres at the box office, the horror. Horrors, however, seem forever lost in direction, whereas a psychological thriller most often takes place in real-life situations and use real-life events to build the story. Horrors often delve deeper into the surreal. Psychological thrillers have taken many forms over the years. From a film set out to deliberately scare the audience, like the 1920 German silent film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which used stunning backdrops to chill the audience to their very core. At one point, the central goal of many psychological thrillers was to mess with the audience and make them question what it was they paid to watch. Like the 1958 Alfred Hitchcock classic Vertigo, wherein the story silently weaves from one subject to the other with very little to bridge the gap of real life and surreal absurdity. And recently, psychological thrillers have been set out to show the human condition as something that is forever changing and even breaking, such as the 2016 M. Night Shyamalan blockbuster Split. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was originally made for $18,000. This is the equivalent to around $239,270, almost 100 years later in 2019. Notable films around this time included Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and The Golem, How He Came to the World. These are seen as taking the horror genre to new heights in the early 20th century, especially in Europe. Modern audiences may seek The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari as an art film, but it was initially released and marketed like a usual horror film in 1920. Many posters and newspaper advertisements included the enigmatic phrase featured in the film, "Du musst Caligari werden," or "You must become Caligari." There was at one time much scrutiny on the exact details of Caligari's release, as there were multiple urban legends, one including that the film was only showed once due to audience disgust. This was disproven years later, as it was revealed by David Robinson that the film was in fact shown in just one theatre, the Mama House Theatre, on February 26, 1920, but highly successful, shown at the theatre for 4 weeks, an unusual amount of time, and then returning 2 weeks later. Caligari was seemingly well received by German critics, with David Robinson writing, "The German critics almost without exception ranged from favourable to ecstatic. This further aided the film in gaining more reach, even outside of Germany, into countries such as France, the UK, and even America." The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is said to be the original psychological thriller. The idea is that the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari holds 3 main character templates: the easily manipulated character in Cesare, the victim of severe circumstance in Francis, and the Grandmaster in Dr. Caligari himself. From this, many films use this template to tell their story. Many of these templates are related to the characters. For example, Francis is portrayed as a regressive character, being confident and happy at the very start of the film, but as events slowly unravel around him, he falls into madness and despair. This shows Francis to be a rather vulnerable character, if truth be told. This is portrayed perfectly by actor Friedrich Ferrer, as he relies on his facial expression due to the complete lack of audiocentric dialogue. This character hinges on his reality, and when things go out of place, he finds it extremely difficult to readjust himself. Cesare is introduced in a catatonic-like state, with no motion or emotion to speak of. Then the manipulation of Caligari takes its toll, as Cesare, who remains under his control for the entirety of the film, begins doing the dirty work of our main antagonist. This includes killing Alan, who calls Dr. Caligari's credibility into question at the fair. Before this, however, Cesare is portrayed as completely under Caligari's control as he commands him to awaken, which he does. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari sets its villain, Caligari, as a manipulative yet relatively regular-looking man, as Caligari appears as a showman in time for the fair, which makes complete sense. Caligari is, however, later revealed to be a manipulative figure who doesn't react well to not getting his own way. We see Caligari's face change in this scene as he is told to wait by the clerk. Caligari's devious nature is made apparent by his abuse of somnambulist Cesare's abilities when he commands him to commit murders of those he feels slightly wronged by. The cabinet of Dr. Caligari constantly utilised close-up shots to emote emotion from the characters without using dialogue or any oralised techniques. The actors' facial expressions were a key part in conveying the emotion and ramifications of the scenes. The expressionistic backgrounds and sceneries play a huge role in the film's overall impact and longevity, as there is constantly something new to notice on repeat viewings. The backgrounds and set pieces create an interesting atmosphere, unlike any other seen at the time, or since. In one scene, a hill seems to have been created to show perspective of the top of the hill being higher up, and therefore smaller. However, when characters travel up and down the hill, it doesn't change and they appear taller than the trees in a very surreal manner. This could be seen as a way of making the film more of a hallucination or a dreamlike sequence. Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo had a respectable $2.5 million US budget, equivalent to $22 million in the current American economy, making it one of Hitchcock's most expensive films ever. Popular thrillers from this time include Robert Meacham's Thunder Road and Touch of Evil. All three of these movies would fall under a PG to PG-13 rating, which is fairly normal for the time, as films rarely exceeded those requirements in America. Vertigo stands, like most of Hitchcock's works, as a standalone story in film, with no sequels, spin-off media or follow-up stories. It was rumoured in the early 60s that a second Vertigo movie was in the horizon for Hitchcock. This project was pulled in pre-production in favour of 1963's The Birds. Vertigo premiered in San Francisco on May 9th, 1958, and will go on to gross $2.8 million in rental in the United States alone, against its $2.5 million cost. This meant the production barely broke even, deeming it a commercial bomb or failure. Originally called Too Long and Unnecessarily Complicated, Vertigo was dubbed a poor outing for Hitchcock upon its initial release in 1958. However, it has since garnered an immense appreciation from critics and audiences. This was cemented in 2012 when Vertigo was named the greatest film ever made by the British Film Institute, beating Citizen Kane by 34 votes. Unlike the other two films, Vertigo only typically focuses on two characters, with very little emphasis on the side characters, though all three established character types are on display, with manipulative, vulnerable, and regressive and/or progressive characters making their appearance. This is Hitchcock, so a female lead is to be expected. However, Kim Novak plays two different characters. An independent woman, Madeline, who soon spirals into a Cesare-like state where she seems to lose control of herself and makes attempts on her own life. This shows Madeline as a regressive character. She later portrays actress Judy, who we learn was hired to portray Madeline to frame her murder as a suicide. Despite this, Judy is revealed to be a rather vulnerable character as she falls for Scotty and does anything and everything in order for him to feel the same about her. There is a debate to be made on whether Scotty was vulnerable due to his disorders or if he was manipulative, as he manipulates Judy to be like Madeline to fill out his fantasy love with her. This can be argued to no end. However, it is also possible to see this as Hitchcock's nod to the voyeuristic audience of the 1950s, and also a challenge on the notion of the male gaze. This dual portrayal of Scotty as a vulnerable yet manipulative character who wants women, Judy, to pretend to be something they are not, Madeline, may be Hitchcock satirizing the decade's view on women and the male gaze. Vertigo is seen as a pioneer in many ways. One of the reasons for this is the inaugural use of the dolly zoom. This is an in-camera effect that appears to undermine normal visual perception, and is achieved by zooming a zoom lens to adjust the angle of view while the camera moves forward or away from a subject in such a way to keep the subject the same size in the frame throughout. As for Hitchcock's Vertigo, Hitchcock and costume designer Edith Head used colour to heighten emotion. As theorised by analytical YouTube creator Neo, they used red to embody obsession, blue and yellow to embody confrontation, and green to embody fiction and falsehood. They also used colour to emphasise particular characters. A perfect example of this is the scene in which Scotty meets Madeline. Madeline is wearing an emerald green dress, and the walls in the background are red. As Scotty looks at Madeline, the red intensifies to show that Scotty has most definitely noticed Madeline. M. Night Shyamalan's 2016 Return to Grace Split was granted a budget of $9 million US. It has made a gross profit of $1.1 million, with over a 2,000% return on investment, making it the most profitable film of 2017. Split was revealed to be the second installment in the eventual Shyamalan trilogy in the Unbreakable universe. The pseudo-prequel Unbreakable was released in 2000, and the sequel Glass was released in 2019. Split was not without its controversy, as many people spoke out against its stereotyping of sufferers of complex mental illnesses as violent and dangerous, as stated by the Australian mental health charity SANE. Split is heavily focused on mental illness, with James McAvoy masterfully portraying many different characters. The base character in this film is Kevin Wendell Crumb, who has dissociative identity disorder and 23 separate personalities. We are told the backstory of Kevin's condition, with explanations that he was abused by his parents and heavily neglected after his father's death. Dennis, an obsessive-compulsive gentleman, was created to mirror Kevin's mother's excessive focus on cleanliness. Patricia, a soft-spoken, mild-mannered, yet deceptively dangerous middle-aged woman, was created again to protect Kevin from his mother by mirroring her politeness. Hedwig reflected Kevin's lost youth, as an imaginative yet easily manipulated 9-year-old boy. For a while leading up to the film's events, Kevin's dominant personality was that of Barry, a charismatic, intelligent and well-spoken man who would control which personality would control Kevin's body. This one character aspect makes Split an incredibly difficult film to analyse, as one character holds so many different mannerisms and attitudes. Dennis and Patricia, the main antagonists for the majority of the film, hold the deceptively normal yet incredibly dangerous character trait set up by Caligari in the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Hedwig fills the category of easily manipulated and vulnerable as set up by Cesare in Caligari. Hedwig is taken for granted and is used by Patricia and Dennis due to his unique ability to control the light, or the ability to choose who inhabits Kevin's body at any one time. This sets up a link between Cesare and Hedwig, as Caligari used Cesare in a similar way to how Dennis and Patricia use Hedwig. And our main protagonist, Casey, claims the role of Francis, though inverted, as Casey goes from being broken and abused to being strong, confident and brave due to the events that unfold in front of her. We see that Casey was abused by her uncle, whom now has sole custody of her, which affects her day-to-day life. As the terrifying events of the film unfold, Casey's innate fear was broken and replaced with a brave and self-responsible young woman. M. Night Shyamalan used modern techniques in order to forward his narrative, and he used emails and computer video files to tell a story rather than go in-depth in regular dialogue. The video files help modernize the film and set it apart from other psychological films, which are often stuck in their ways. Along with modern technology, Shyamalan used sound design and camera angles to differentiate between each personality of Kevin's collective horde. Personality shifts would happen out of nowhere at times, therefore it was important for Shyamalan to convey each new character shift effectively, without wasting the revelation on unnecessary dialogue.